A generate person.
Ready. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Dauphi. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And our co-host today will be Lee Clark, who is our Funding and Information Librarian. So we would first like to welcome all of our panelists who have so graciously donated their time to talk about winning the grant. And we're going to be talking about the grant seeking process, the grant application process, managing grants and things like that. So we're going to start off with some scripted questions from Lee and I to kind of get the ball rolling. And then later on, we will certainly be able to take your questions. So I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Dr. Georgia Urvantis from,
Hey guys,
as you can hear.
Sorry about that.
That's right. She is the Vice President and Director of Grants for Easel Animal Rescue in Ewing, New Jersey. We have Beth Miller, who is the Development Specialist from Special Strides. We have Dr. Stephen Lederman and Bonnie Goldman, who are the co-presidents of the Bordentown Historical Society. And lastly, but not leastly, we have Natalie Tung from Homeworks Trenton, and she's the co-founder and executive director there. So welcome all of our panelists, welcome all of our attendees, and thank you for joining us today. Before we jump in, we do have a few housekeeping items to go through. First and foremost, as I said, we will be taking your questions. So please, you can send them in using the Q&A feature on the dashboard, or you can type them into the chat box too. Lee and I will be monitoring that, and we'll certainly get to your questions. There is a survey that will be provided at the end of this webinar, as well as in a follow-up email. If you have a moment, we ask you please complete the survey. We love hearing your feedback, as it does really help us move forward with our programming and make sure that you are getting the best possible programs from us. If you want some more resources on grant writing, Lee has created a fantastic research guide for grant information. It's on the web address at the screen there. We will send out a link in the chat for that so that you will be able to access that at your leisure. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Zoom dashboard, just in case, this is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a Mac or a PC. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard might look a little bit different depending on which device you're using, but all of the features will still be there. First and foremost, you have your audio settings down here. So in case anything happens during the program and your audio gets disrupted, you can check there to make sure that the audio settings are correct. Down here, as I mentioned, for questions, you can hit the Q&A button or you can hit the chat button and we'll send out your questions there. We'd love to hear from you. Or if you run into any issues, there is a raise hand button here, so you can do that, and either Lee or myself will get in contact with you and hopefully be able to resolve it. That is everything that I have for you, but I wanted to turn over to Lee right now for just a brief explanation of the funding information collection and the other Fin network.
Thanks, Andrew. Again, my name is Lee Clark. I'm the Business and Funding Information Librarian within our State Library's Information Center. That's the physical library in Trenton for the New Jersey State Library. One of our collections is the Funding Information Center, and that is where this program is coming out of. So through this collection, we are a member of Candid's Funding Information Network. You might know them better as the Foundation Center. They changed their name a couple years ago when they merged with GuideStar. And through that membership in the Funding Information Network, also known as Fin Network, we provide free on-site access to 2 of their grantmaker databases. So if you weren't aware of that, you can come to the library and use those databases for free to research grant funders. Those include the Grants to Individuals, which is for individual funding like scholarships, fellowships, that kind of thing. And then we do have Foundation Directory Online Professional, which is for nonprofits looking for grant funding primarily. So those are available on site. We are open now for on-site research. So I encourage you, if you want to come down and use those databases to set up an appointment, or we do have a limited amount of walk-in availability as well, but appointments are encouraged. And then until the end of this year, 2021, we are still providing remote access to Foundation Directory Online, or FDO Essential, which is a slightly less robust version of the professional version that we have on site. So if you're interested in using that remote access, go to that website at the bottom of your screen right now. That's our Funding Information Center webpage. Also on that are links to our research guides, which Andrew already mentioned, video recordings of past webinars, tutorial videos, that kind of thing. So there's a whole bunch of information on there that I encourage you to check out. In addition to our electronic resources, we have over 1,000 print resources related to nonprofit management, fundraising, philanthropy in general, really, you name it. We probably have a book or a magazine related to it. Those can be checked out. We encourage people to request that through interlibrary loan through their public library. So if you see a title that you're interested in, you can contact your public library to see if you can get that from our collection. And then we do have free classes and tutorials, one of which you're taking advantage of today. More of those classes can be found on our events calendar on our website, our main homepage, right at the bottom. So last thing I wanted to share is just that we're not the only funding information network partner in New Jersey. There are, I think, 7 now, including the state library throughout New Jersey. And they're pretty spread out. So I encourage you, if you're not local to Trenton or the Mercer County area, to look at your local library to see what is the closest fin location to you. Sometimes the closest fin location is in a different state. So I have included that link at the bottom, candid.org/find-us, where you can type in your zip code and see if there's maybe a fin location closer in New York or maybe in Pennsylvania. There's a training fin in Philadelphia, which has a ton of programming, which at the Parkway Library for the Free Library of Philadelphia, definitely encourage you to check them out. They have some great programs there. So without further ado, let's kick off this panel discussion. Winning the grant, a panel discussion from grant recipients. I really just want to say a big thank you to our 5 panelists now for taking time out of their day to talk a little bit about their grant experiences, because I'm sure they have a very busy schedule. Running and working with a nonprofit is very time consuming. It takes a lot of work. So I really, really appreciate that. Our first question today is just going to be an introductory question. And I'm going to start this off with Georgia, and then we'll go in alphabetical order by last name. I just want to introduce yourself and briefly tell us a little bit about your organization.
Hi, I'm Georgia Arvanitis. I'm with Easel Animal Rescue League, and I've been with the organization, I guess, just about from the beginning, which is 2008. Gone through various roles within the organization, but I've landed as the vice president and director of grants. Easel is a fabulous organization, and we have a mission to reduce the number of unwanted animals euthanized in Mercer County through collaborative coalitions and community alliances. Currently, we manage the Ewing Township Animal Shelter as a location, and we also have a very robust foster network throughout Mercer County and surrounding areas as well. Last year, we did over 1,300 cat adoptions and over 300 dog adoptions, which is phenomenal, considering that we have a very lean staff. We only have a few folks at the shelter itself, and everything else is done by volunteers. So the folks who are at the shelter are basically there to do the day-to-day care of the animals who are on site. And everything else is done by volunteers. Our fundraising, our grant writing, a lot of the medical work, veterinary care for the animals is handled by volunteers. And of course, the fosters who do a fabulous job with helping raise those little animals.
And Bonnie, if you want to go next.
Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Letterman, and this is my wife, Bonnie Goldman, and we are the co-presidents of the Bordentown Historical Society. We took over as presidents in October of last year, and it was definitely a very new experience for us. I'm a retired cardiologist, and Bon is a retired judge, a municipal court judge. So we did not have a lot of training in regards to nonprofit management and certainly grant writing. So it's sort of been a learn as you go situation for us. But a little bit about our organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and our mission is as a historical society, not surprisingly, is to preserve, teach, and inspire curiosity about Bordentown's rich history. And the thing that makes it really interesting and challenging is that the history, Bordentown's history, is really quite incredible. And we have a main base of operation, which is a 1740s meeting house in Bordentown City. And we also own and manage the Cloud Barton Schoolhouse, the effectively one-room schoolhouse in which Cloud Barton taught and established the first public school in New Jersey in 1852. Our volunteer, or our organization is entirely volunteer based, and we do not have one person in charge of grant writing, although we'd love to find one person to put in charge of grant writing. So that's a little bit about us. Bon, do you have anything to add?
No, just that I think we really have increased our number of members from a year ago, July. I think we had maybe 150 members, and now we have over 320 members. And we've really tried to focus on getting younger people involved in the Historical Society. When I was a younger person, the Historical Society in Bordentown, and where I was born, it just seemed to be not a very welcoming society. So we're really trying to turn that around and get everybody excited, including, interacting with the school system.
Beth, did you want to go next?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting Special Strides to be part of this. I love coming to platforms like this because I get to learn about so many different things that go on in this incredible state of New Jersey. My name is Beth Miller, and I'm the development specialist for Special Strides. I've been with the organization for about 6 years now. Special Strides supports individuals with special needs with physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and then that's the medical model. And we also have adaptive riding, and we also offer EFL and clinical education at our facility. Before everything changed last year, we roughly had 150 clients come to our facility and receive a variety of therapies, services, support for them and their families. Special Strides is roughly a little bit more than, I believe it's 22 years old now. And we also rely very heavily on volunteers to help our organization work. We've had to adapt significantly due to the pandemic. We traditionally had very large high school contingent of volunteers come and help with respect to fundraising, with respect to sidewalking. We provided training for that, with respect to maintenance of trails and those types of things on the farm at the facility. Because we are a medical facility, we had to change and adapt drastically because we needed to ensure the health and safety of not only our employees, but also our clients who are medically fragile. So what do I do at Special Strides? I'm actually remote. I was remote even before our models have changed. And I manage the database. I help write annual reports. I help with grants. I write acknowledgement letters. I come to these wonderful types of presentations. And I'm just delighted to hop in and learn wherever I need to learn and help our organization wherever I can and provide the knowledge that I have.
Ellie?
Hi, everyone. I just also want to echo what Beth is saying and say thank you so much for having me here today, having us here today. My name is Natalie. I am the co-founder and executive director of Homeworks Trenton. We are a free community-based after-school residential program for Black and brown girls in Trenton, New Jersey. So basically from Sunday nights to Friday mornings, our girls stay overnight in our dorm. We take them to and from their public schools during the day. We pick them up. Then we do programming focused on academics, life skills, civic engagement, women empowerment. They then have family style meals, stay overnight, and go home on the weekends. But at the core of what we're doing is creating a community specifically for Black and brown women to reclaim power over their cultures, their identities, and experiences. And since we started in 2016, we've raised around $1.5 million in cash and in-kind donations. We have a development and program manager. We're actually in transition now, so our new development and program manager is starting this Monday, but they're usually the ones managing all of the grants and helping us bring in money in that way. So yeah, thank you for having me.
We can move on to the next question, and we'll start with Natalie for this. What is your or your organization's experience with the grant funding process?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Andrew. This is, it's definitely, our grant funding process has definitely been a learning process, a learning journey for us. When we started in 2016, we had no experience. It was very much a startup. I started this when I was a student, so we were kind of learning on the go. But over the years, now we've kind of, through attending webinars like this and through talking to experts, we've been able to kind of build a process in that it works for us right now. But basically what we do is we actually still house everything on an Excel sheet where we have interns or volunteers help us find grants that really kind of, we've defined, okay, what are we specifically looking for? And they basically then put everything onto this database that we've built out. Based on that, we look at the deadlines and we see, you know, is this really, we kind of do a second check and say, okay, is this really something that we should apply to, given the amount that they would be funding us, and you know how much work it's going to take and what is our capacity at that point. Then we go, our development and program manager drafts everything out. We then kind of do a 3-way editing process where we have a boilerplate, which means that we have our description of, you know, of things that usually our grants have asked, and we just then copy and paste it. Then we tailor it to the specific grant. We make sure obviously that we're reading, you know, what is the foundation's priorities, you know, and how can we make sure that we that this aligns. Then we submit, and then after that, you know, depending on if we've had prior contact with the foundation, you know, we'll obviously make sure that, you know, we've had those conversations, and then it's a waiting game, and we see if we got accepted or rejected, and then based on that, I know there are other questions later. So that's kind of our process that has been evolving throughout the years. But we also recently signed up for this platform called Elio, which also helps manage a lot of these grants for a small fee each month. And so that's something that we're looking to transfer everything into very soon.
Thank you. Beth, do you want to give it a shot?
Sure. So similar to Natalie, it is an evolving process. During the 22 years that Special Strides has existed, in the beginning, it was a very different place than it is today. And even in the 6 years that I've been there, when I first joined, we did have some grants that came in. Usually that came in. We applied for, and then we were awarded. And mostly that was based on contacts that we had throughout our community. And so people that knew us well and thought that we should apply for things would encourage us to do that. And we would fill out the applications and just see what happened. Well, in the last 3 years, certainly 2 years, we've had to change a lot of how we do things. And so we had to focus on other ways to get granting. And we employed well, first, the very first thing, about 3 or 4 years ago, I did come to one of the library systems presentations at Community Works, which happens every year in Princeton. And I found out, wow, there's a great way for me to search this foundation directory and I don't have to have a membership to do it. So I spent one day at Hillsborough Library and I did some research and we started applying that way. And so that was our process to kind of look into, well, what other things are there, as opposed to just having our community members say, hey, there's a grant, why don't you apply for it? I was able to do a little bit of research there. And then just like in any organization, there's only so many hours in the day, right? And so you have to figure out, well, where is it that we can apply our time? And there's a balance. And because I think the pandemic shifted so many things in all of our lives, we were fortunate that we were able to really dive into grants. We employed a company that helps with respect to data mining through the foundation directory, and they gave us a recommendation of a couple of different grants to apply to. And really the way the process works in our organization, so we also have a database that houses donor information as well as, that's what I do, houses donor information as well as, process with grants. But then we also started using a lot of the features in the Google platform with respect to document sharing. We now are much more organized. We have folders with respect to the different components that you would need to do different types of grants. Some grants require a lot of information. Some grants just require a little bit of information. And again, this was an evolving process. We work as a team. There are 4 major players on this team. I usually do the beginning work on a grant. I'll fill in all the information and then we work on refining from there. And doing that. I know there are other questions later that'll address some of the other points of how we go about the process, but in a nutshell, that's what we do.
Great, thank you. Stephen and Bonnie, your take.
Here we go. Sorry about that. Similar to Natalie's experience, for us, it has definitely been a major learning process. We've been successful in the past in getting a number of grants, but unfortunately, the grants that we received have not been organized well. And so that was sort of one of the number one things we needed to do, is to try and get things better organized. We've relied on, for larger grants, the help of an historic architect, Margaret Westfield, and she's helped us with a number of large grants. And by large grants, I mean $80,000 to $112,000 since 2012. She's been fantastic for us, but unfortunately, it's not cheap to enlist her services. So obviously, being our organization being limited in terms of income and how much money we can spend on historic architect to help us with grants, we've done our best to try and find grants that that Bon and I could work on, and we've been fortunately successful in getting a number of grants this past year. To get those grants, we've relied on word of mouth. So a couple of people came up to us, similar to Beth's experience, and said, "Hey, why don't you apply for this?" Which we did, and to my surprise, we were successful. So we've also used seminars to try and get up to speed with what we need to better improve our ability to find, apply for, and receive grant funding. That's it's still a major challenge for us. We would love to have one person that would step up and say, hey, I'm taking over the grant writing.
Yeah, we're looking for that one retired person.
And it's
who's-
been very difficult to find.
Not
Anyway.
to mention somebody to cut the grass and shovel the snow. Yes.
So do you have anything else to say?
I don't think so. Yeah. It's, I think we're patting ourselves on the back a bit, given our lack of experience, because we have been fairly successful this past year. And that's been encouraging, but we know we have, we still have a lot to learn, but we're getting better organized and we can, I think a lot of the things that have already been said by some of the other folks have applied to us as well. So thank you.
Georgia, you want to take us home on this question?
Sure. So my experience with grants is quite a bit different than all of your other panelists. I first started writing grants over 30 years ago as a faculty member at the College of New Jersey. And so before I did anything with EASL, I had about 25 years of writing grants to very large foundations like the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, to support research in my as a chemistry faculty member. And a lot of that has, of course, been really, really helpful as I've worked with EASL. But a lot of it you have to throw completely out the window because, of course, scientific writing is very data-driven, whereas with our animal welfare grants, it is and it isn't. And I can expand a little bit on that. But what I find is very different, vastly different in what I do for the nonprofit and what our team does is it relies a lot on emotions. And you can certainly imagine that animal rescue is a very, very emotional topic. And so the success, even for grants or any donations that we get, has to do with, tugging on the heartstrings and finding people who are engaged in helping animals and giving them a better life. So that to me was a very, very different place to be. But at least I brought to the organization a lot of experience in terms of the fundamentals of, putting together the data aspects and the project management aspects of a grant. I don't do the grant writing alone. We have a team. And as I mentioned before, everyone who's not involved in shelter hands-on care of the animals is a volunteer for EASL. Our grant writing team is comprised of, I think, 7 volunteers with various types of experience. And the nice thing about it is we have a mixture of people who are good with data, budgets, numbers, as well as people who are good with creative writing. And that's really, really important because you have to be telling a story about the animals in order to even get a foundation type grant in this world. The other thing that's really different from my academic experience and my foundation and 501c3 experience is that the I would say how shall I put it? Well, there's a lot of contest-based grants here. And the other thing is that the grants are significantly smaller. I'm quite impressed when I talk to people in 501c3 who can get grants on the order of $100,000. That really does not come about too often in animal rescue. We're looking at very, very small amounts of money, $5,000, $2,000, occasionally $20,000, which really does go a long way for helping the animals, but it's not what's out there for human types of charities. So that's the other really big difference that I've seen. Nonetheless, my team is extraordinarily enthusiastic. Even when an opportunity comes up to apply for $500, they are really, really good at jumping in to help with the grant. The other thing that I try to do is always have 2 people working on a grant. So we'll have one person who's a primary writer, and then the second person who kind of reviews, thinks, and asks questions. And very often I try to pair them up as a data person and also a creative person to kind of, get the 2 arms together for what we need to write a compelling and successful grant application. So hopefully this information will help those of you out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we can move on, Lee.
Definitely. Those were some great examples. So kind of in line with the last question, coming from your different perspectives, what have you learned in the grant application process? And if there's something that you wish you had known prior to applying for maybe your first grant or your second grant, if you want to share that as well. And then we'll go right back to you, Georgia.
Sure. I guess, specifically,
Georgia, you're muted, I think.
yeah, I don't know how that happened. Okay, is that better?
We can hear you.
Okay, wait a second. Where did this go? Zoom just disappeared. Here we go. Okay, you're back. All right, sorry about that. The thing that I've learned the most going through this grant writing process with EASL is the fact that so many of the grants that are out there for animal welfare are contest-based and they're not really program-based. So I guess what I mean by that is it's a grant where you kind of put together the compelling story of an animal or a set of animals, and then it's not just a foundation board that reviews your grant, but it actually goes out to public voting. So it goes up on Facebook or somewhere on the internet, and people will look at your story and, decide whether or not you get funding. So that's a little bit unusual. And I'm not really sure if that occurs outside of animal welfare or if it's something that's very specific to us. But it's been quite a challenge for us to learn how to handle and manage those types of grants as opposed to the more traditional type of grant.
Great. Stephen and Bonnie, is there anything
Sure.
that you've learned?
Well, I've learned that it's a lot of hard work. It is at least moderately to very time consuming. And for Bon and I, that's very challenging, trying to find the time in addition to taking care of all our other responsibilities with the Historical Society. And the good news is that there's a lot going on with the Historical Society. So, it points to, at least for us, the need to continue to look for a well-qualified person who can take over at least a little bit of the responsibilities of grant writing so that we can be in a better position going forward to identify and get additional grants. And
we have made it clear in emails to our members, hey, if there's anybody out there that can help with grant writing, and even when people become members, there are different categories, and we ask them what their interests are, and grant writing is one of the categories. So it's not like we haven't been looking.
And if they say they're interested in grant writing, we visit them with lots of chocolate and try and bribe them into taking over. That hasn't happened yet, by the way.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, that's about it from us here.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth, do you have anything to share?
Sure. First of all, I also want to echo what Stephen and Bonnie are saying. It is time consuming, and the need to be very organized is very. It might sound like such an easy thing to say. You have to be organized, but that is also very true. And Georgia, I wanted to also comment to you. There have been a couple of circumstances where we've been kind of like in this, like, who votes the most for you? There have been a couple of situations where we've been in grant process and been involved in those types of, if we win the popularity contest, then we win the grant. So there have been a couple that are like that. The other thing that I learned through the process is reach out to the contacts of people that you know. And I know that also goes back to what Stephen and Bonnie were talking about, but that's not just with respect to grant writing, but go to your board and say, look, we're looking at this grant. Does anybody that you know sit on those boards? And really having the personal touch and knowing more about what the language means on the grant proposal, the words, like what does it mean? Because how I interpret it and how they mean it might be different. So having people that you can call and say, can you clarify? The people that are offering the grants aren't trying to waste your time either. And they would be much happier to have a 3-minute conversation and say, yes, this makes sense for you to apply, or no, it doesn't. It saves everybody a lot of time. But I do want to there's one quick story. And one of the most important things that I learned is came about because of my first foray into searching the foundation directory. And we found this grant, and it looked like they had supported other organizations like ours. And I applied, and we were all very happy, and we sent it through. And literally 12 hours before the deadline, I got a call from the managing partner, and they said, look, we really, really like your organization. We like what you have, or we would grant something like this, but we don't grant that specific thing. So can you give me something else? And then I was like, oh my God, I don't have a list of what we should ask for. Fortunately, I remember like from 3 months ago, somebody had mentioned that we needed to redo something in our facility. So and we happen to have a quote for that, thank God. So I was able to change the grant and reapply within that window. She backed it out for me so that I could reapply. So another very important thing is have a list of items that you need to fund and talk to it's not just everybody that's in your particular group. Go out to your donors and just find a list. And then once you have that list of things that you need, your whole organization needs, then the core group of people can rank them. But then at least you have a list so that if somebody comes back to you and says, we like, your organization fits our protocol, or profile, we need something else to fund, then you'll have that tool and you won't miss that opportunity. So that would just be my other thing that I learned that was very exciting.
Great example. Natalie, you want to finish this out on this question?
Yeah, definitely. I'll keep it short because I think everyone here gave good advice on, and I think a lot of it, I would probably share the same thing. I also want to echo what Georgia and Beth were saying about, voting. We've also been in pitch competitions that has happened before. But I would say the one other thing and it's similar to what Beth was saying about, reaching out to people that in the grant, writing process, or even if you don't know them and you just want to learn more about the grant. I think that is important. There was one grant years ago that we applied to. We ended up getting rejected, and we reached out and asked, what was going on, why is it? And they said that, yeah, actually, we don't fund anything. So even though in the eligibility requirements, it said we fund Mercer County, it was actually a very specific part of Mercer County or wherever it was. And so, for us, like if we had done, if we had reached out, and even though we were technically part of the eligibility requirements, if we had reached out and looked more into it, then we could have probably avoided that. And we spent a lot of time on that grant. And so I think that's kind of one thing I would say. The second is always try to ask for feedback. That's something that we do a lot, just because you never know. there could be grants that we just didn't get that year, but may have actually a better chance the year after. And also then you're forming relationships with people at the foundations, and you can kind of get a better understanding of, is this something that we can align with, and they are aligning with us. And so those are kind of my two quick things we've learned.
So thank you. Move on to the next question now. How do you find grant opportunities for your organization? Natalie, give it a stab.
Yeah. So actually, I think it's interesting because there are actually so many grant opportunities out there. I think so much so, and I think Stephen, Bonnet, you guys talked about it's. I think a big part of it is just we just don't have enough time to write enough grants, but there are so many opportunities. For us, we have actually never, and Lee, I need to reach out to you because we have never gone through you all, and I know that there's so many databases out there. We subscribe to, I think, some newsletters that give out kind of grant information for free. So whether it's like kind of community, Trenton-based grants, because we're in the Trenton area, or even I think for me specifically, because I'm a young founder of color, there are grants specifically for me. So then I'll go into those listservs, and then so a lot of for us are through email chains, but then also I think what's helpful is sometimes if you look through different websites of organizations that are similar to yours, and if you then kind of look through who is funding them, that's also a good way to kind of get a better understanding, especially because there are so many grants. We want to make sure that we aren't wasting our time and that we're really finding grants that are a really good fit. So that's how we do it.
Thank you, Natalie. Beth?
Yes, just to echo what Natalie was saying with respect to going on to different websites of different organizations and finding out who they fund. The other way that you can find out is through the annual reports. If you find other organizations that are like yours, then you can look at those annual reports and see where they're getting funding from. Sometimes it'll just be enough to go to a board meeting with that list, and somebody might say, oh, I don't know somebody on that board, but I know somebody on this board that is similar type of funding organization. So it's a useful thing to have. But the thing that's been most effective for us is using what was just referred to before as the Foundation Directory Online, and now as Candid. That was truly the gold mine. And the problem is that it's huge. I mean, that's great because there's a lot of grants that are available, but it's huge. And you could hire somebody and have them go through the database and look through that and not even have a grant written. So we did hire a small company that does data mining through that database, and they provided us, they helped us get organized as far as our funding priorities. And then they gave us a list of different funders to apply to, and we've been very successful with that. It wasn't that much, it wasn't very expensive for us to hire this firm to do that data mining, and it was very useful to help us launch off and kind of look in that area. So that's how we find our grant opportunities. And then still we have people who will come to us from our organization and say, hi, I work for such and such, and we do grant funding. This is the person that you should call or go onto this website. So those are the two main ways, is through Candid and through word of mouth.
Stephen and Bonnie?
Yeah, so similar to what Beth said, this past year, we've relied a lot on word of mouth, and that's been successful for us. The League of Historical Societies of New Jersey sends out emails regularly and does mention grant opportunities. I've gone online to look at what's available, and again, the thing that I run into is the time commitment required to research all this stuff. And then we also, fortunately, have gotten recommendations from the historic architect who's helped us for, who I mentioned previously. And she's well aware of grants that are coming due that don't necessarily involve hiring her for that. So that's been helpful as well.
And a couple of things can happen as a result of publicity, because we're trying to preserve and restore the Clara Barton Schoolhouse, and it is Clara Barton's 200th birthday on December 25th of this year. So I had articles in a lot of the local newspapers, and the Burlington County Times ran an article which was read by a group in Morristown, New Jersey, the Questers group. And so they contacted me, and they really had an interest in the Clara Barton Schoolhouse. They had seen it before, like in 2019, they had come and visited our buildings. So they asked me if I wanted to apply for a grant. It's not a large grant, $2,500 grant to restore the original Clara Barton Schoolhouse sign that was outside of the schoolhouse. And I knew that they had a real true interest in this. And of course, they did ask other people to apply for this grant. But I felt pretty confident that we had a good chance of getting this grant, which we did receive. And so sometimes just publicizing, what you need to do is enough to have people come to you. And there's another, well, of course, the other thing I did, we have a local bank. We wanted to get some money to do a Clara Barton puzzle for her 200th birthday year. And we were fortunate in getting $2,000 on two different, both the 2020 and 2021 from our local bank, where we have all of our accounts. So, we thought that helped. But, and then there's another big issue that's going on in town that relates to a really historic railroad bridge. And it turns out that there's someone, a geologist, who's extremely knowledgeable about this whole thing and has written a lot about this particular bridge. And he was very, very helpful in helping us write a Burlington County grant that relates to this particular bridge. So sometimes you can find a person who has the knowledge and the real interest in helping you with a very specific thing. And he did a lot of the writing for us for this particular grant. So that was really exciting to find him. And hope for the best for that kind of thing to happen in the future. But I also did want to say that, as some of the others have mentioned, I have looked at the sponsors that have been, donors in for other historical societies. And that gave us some ideas as to, where we could try to apply even for smaller amounts of money.
All right, thank you. Before we move to Georgia, a follow-up for Beth came in. Would you be able to share the name of the data mining company, if you remember it?
Yeah, I believe it's called Funding for Good. I believe that was the name of the organization that we worked with, but you can search online. There are many different companies that will help with respect to doing research. That's all they do. So they have a team that sits together and they plug in certain criteria and they're able to do that research. And instead of having somebody do it full time, then you just have an organization do it, and then you get a couple of grants to work on. And that's what's really good, because then you're not just spinning your wheels. So.
Person doing that, but he was.
All right, thank you. Georgia, your experience with finding grants for EASL.
Yeah, so finding grants, again, like everyone else has spoken about, there's definitely, you've got to do some digging through different databases, networking, of course. I think the challenge, of course, with animal welfare is there's not nearly as much out there for animals as there are for humans. So there's a lot of digging that we have to do. And I think we spend probably more time digging than we actually do writing, which is okay. I mean, we are fairly successful once we find a foundation that is willing to support animal welfare. We are really pretty good at getting grants from them.
So much. We can move on to our next question.
Okay, so next question. You've been awarded the grant. What goes into the managing the grant process? What happens after you've gotten that grant award? So if you want to talk a little bit about your experiences with managing grants, we'll throw it right back to Georgia.
Sure. Managing the award is pretty much dependent on being able to keep good data, I think, from our perspective, because say it's an award for a specific project. For example, we've gotten grant funding for spay neuter for low-income residents. We need to keep track of, how many residents we assisted, how many animals, what the costs were. All of that stuff needs to be put into a database so that when it comes time to writing a grant report, we can access it. Because really, in order to get a second grant from a foundation, they want to know that you did right by the funding that they gave you the first time. And so making sure that your grant report matches well with what your grant application said you were going to do, that you met all the goals, relies very heavily on having good data. And then the other thing, of course, for us is having a happy tale or two to tell, which means we can talk about specific animals and how that funding that we got helped those specific animals and the families that they live with. So it's really important to follow that animal from start to finish and the family, and make sure you communicate with them and get information, pictures, quotes, things like that, and gather that all together. We use two places to kind of warehouse all of our information. We use a management software program that allows us to track all of the animals, all of the humans, and all of the money that are associated with a particular animal. We can upload pictures to it. We can put log data in there for follow-ups with the families, making sure that we get information from them. Say it's a dog that they adopted. We do follow-up 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months. So we get all of that stuff together, and that helps us to come up with these really nice, fantastic stories that we can thank our sponsors for helping these particular animals. The other thing we do is we use Google Drive for anything that we can't really fit into that shelter management software. We have a Google Drive shared location where all of our team members, grant team members, and shelter staff can place odds and ends. And as long as it's a very searchable database, as long as you kind of use some good keywords, then you can pull out that information. And that really helps to make a good grant report. To show that you've used your money wisely. Yeah, I guess that's about the most important thing I feel for managing grant awards.
Being organized is definitely key. Stephen and Bonnie, you want to go next?
So in regards to the larger grants that we've received, fortunately, the historic architect really keeps track of where the money's going, thank God, because that would be really challenging for us. For the smaller grants, we are accumulating experience, I guess it's the best way to put it, because we've just received a number of small grants, and we're in the process of trying to figure out how best to manage them. But clearly the key is going to be to stay organized. For grants in that we've received before we were president, I know that we established a separate banking account for the one grant. And that makes it easier for us to do, but I don't think that's going to be possible for the other small grants that we've received this year. So, I've been talking to our treasurer, who we recently appointed, and we're in the process of working out how best to track this, because obviously it's really critically important that we can do a good job in this regard. Don, you have
Yeah,
anything
I
else
don't
to say?
think I have anything to add. And we did, you know, the important thing is for us to clarify with the treasurer, whatever has been, for example, we got a grant that relates to some of our programming. And there were a lot of expenses that were incurred in buying things for the staging and things of that nature, and buying masks and hand cleaners, all that stuff. And, you know, that was all done in advance. And we just have to make sure that when all of those things go to the treasurer, that they are associated with that one particular grant that was given to us for this programming event. So, and he is a CPA, and I think he's, you know, pretty competent and will be really helpful in helping us keep track of some of that information. But it's a little scary.
Utilizing the expertise of your organization is very helpful. Beth, you want to add to that?
Sure, just to echo what everybody said before, is making sure you're organized. Most importantly is that you follow what the grantor requests. And I've seen things vary widely. Some just need some very superficial data. Some need to have very specific data. And so, you know, just trying to bear in mind what it is that the grantor is requesting. Some have a specific spreadsheet that they want you to use, and some are just happy with narrative. I can say there was one grant that we received that because of complications with respect to permitting and COVID and all of those things, we were very delayed in spending the money. And so we just had to be very careful and explain to the grantor what was going on. And certainly everybody understood that, but really communicating, making sure you're following the guidelines that a specific organization requires. And again, just being organized.
Natalie?
Yeah, I think the benefit of going last is that everyone has kind of spoken about all that, but I think I just want to echo what everyone is saying. It's about staying organized, especially because grants they have different expectations. And I think we are kind of at this point now where it was hard to actually just continue recording everything on like a document or an Excel sheet, and that's why we are transitioning to Elio, which is the platform that we're using. So I'll let you know we signed up for it, but have not fully used it yet. So I'll let you all know how that goes.
We handled not getting the grant. Guess this also deals with follow-up and things like that. So Natalie?
I think for this, at this point, we have been rejected from many grants. We've been lucky to receive many grants. We've also been rejected from many grants. And I would say that for us, again, like what I mentioned before, it's about, we always try to follow up and get some feedback, just so that we know how to move forward from there, both within like a general grant and then also within a specific grant as well. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Beth, your thoughts?
To echo what Natalie said, we also follow up with the grantor, find out why we didn't get it. Sometimes there are just many organizations applying that year. Sometimes their focus changes a little bit. And then depending on the feedback that we get from them, we would reapply the following year. But another really quick story is we had a situation where we were looking to fund something from 2 different grantors, and we got one grant and the other one we were denied. And so now we were like, oh no, what do we do? Because we have to spend the money, but we don't have all the money. So we turned it around and turned it into a crowdsourcing type of a scenario where we said, look, we've got all this money. We're trying to do this for the organization. It was for a physical object and from at Special Strides. It was for a ADA ramp. And so everybody went out and contributed. So we were able to get the funds that we needed, not from a grant. Unfortunately, we were denied, but we had a timeline to work against. And that was very, very successful. And a lot of people in your organization feel very excited when they know you have money to spend and you're just a little bit short. So that was another thing that we did in order to meet the goal of building that particular thing at our site.
Good story. Thank you. Stephen and Bonnie.
So over the past year, there have been, fortunately, only 2 grants that we were denied. And to be honest with you, I now realize the importance of following up with the grantors and getting more information as to why we didn't get the grants. That's something I didn't do, but that's something that I will be doing going forward. So
I had, first of all, I just have to back up a little bit and say that when Georgia talked about telling a story, how she has to tell a story and for animal welfare grants and, get to our heartstrings, which Georgia, you've gotten to mine, trust me. But we tell a story as well. And with regard to the Clara Barton Schoolhouse, there was an incredible story that I told to the NJEA, New Jersey Education Association, really being hopeful that they could help with some fundraising, particularly since, as I said, this is Clara Barton's 200th birthday year. And, it's the first public school in the state of New Jersey, and Clara Barton, an American icon, taught there. So I thought, well, let me reach out to the NJEA because 101 years ago, when this little schoolhouse was going to fall down, a local resident bought it at a sheriff's sale for $300 and shortly thereafter donated to the state of New Jersey for $1 on the condition that it be preserved forevermore for the benefit of the students of the state of New Jersey and forevermore to honor Clara Barton. So what happened was then the state commissioner of education wrote to all the students and teachers in the whole state and said to the students, can you donate 1 penny to restore the Clara Barton Schoolhouse, and ask teachers to give not more than a nickel. And $3,400 was raised 101 years ago to restore the Clara Barton Schoolhouse in this incredible student-funded campaign, which is really historic and adorable. So in any event, that was the equivalent of $55,000 that was raised to preserve the schoolhouse. And the schoolhouse, underwent this preservation effort. Well, I thought, wouldn't it be really cool for the NJEA to do something to get the interest, to pique the interest of teachers and whatever, and help us restore the schoolhouse? Well, I sent them lots of information, and they don't really have, they told me they didn't have a grant per se, and they sent me these guidelines, and it was clear we didn't fit within their guidelines. It was like putting a square peg in a round hole. But I said, you really need to look a little beyond your guidelines here because it's such a special, one-of-a-kind thing. And I had lots of conversations with some people at the NJEA, which led me to believe that they really thought there was a way that something could happen here, even if it was putting information in their monthly newsletter that might pique the interest of some teachers. Well, yesterday, now the question is, how do you handle not getting the grant? Well, I was making this chocolate stuff, and I got the phone call that they weren't going to do anything. They weren't even going to put anything in their newsletter saying, hey, anybody that wants to help preserve the Clara Barton Schoolhouse, contact the Board Now Historical Society. So of course, what I did, which was of course understandable, was I ate a lot of chocolate, and then started to think, and they did not give me any reasons. She did say, well, maybe you can try again another time. And I thought, well, when's it going to be any better of a time than Clara Barton's 200th birthday? But in any event, what I have started to think about since this was a initiation from the state, from the state originally, was to maybe contact somebody at the state or contact somebody at the county level and even the local level, to see if I can get, a little more interest in one of those, from one of those locales. But I have to say, I was really surprised that there wasn't anything that the NJEA was going to do in supporting us at all. So that's been my biggest disappointment so far. And that was just yesterday. I'm still eating chocolate.
Thank you, Bonnie. Georgia, your thoughts?
When I was a professor and applying for grants, it was considered to be excellent if you had a 25% success rate. And every grant that you applied for, a review came back, whether you were funded or not. They told you, anonymous referees' comments, so that you kind of knew where you could potentially improve your grant application for the next time. So having had that previous experience, every time we haven't gotten funded, I always reach out to the program officer, the foundation officer where we've applied, and ask them if they can provide us with some of the reviewers' comments so that we can improve. And then I always ask them questions about what can we do to be more successful next time. The fortunate thing is EASL's success rate is greater than 25%. So I haven't had to ask a lot of times why we didn't get funded. But when I do, the foundation officers are usually pretty good about responding to why you didn't get the funding, and even making suggestions on where else to apply for that funding, or how to do a resubmission for the next grant cycle. So it's just a function of good lines of communication with the program officers where you're applying.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so for our last question, we know that grant funding is not, most organizations can't rely on grant funding alone. So I wanted to see if you would be willing to talk about some other revenue streams that your organization uses. So how does grant funding fit into your overall fundraising plan? And are there any other types of fundraising that your organization really depends on? Georgia, I'm going to throw that back to you.
Okay. So yeah, I guess grants are only a small component, maybe 10% of EASL's revenues every year. And I think that's probably pretty much in line with most 501c3s. I don't think that grants are the majority of funding. I think private donations are certainly much more prevalent than grants. And for us, we do all kinds of little fundraisers. We try to do some bigger ones too, but of course, the last couple of years, doing them in person has not quite been possible. So we've switched to some online fundraisers, but we've done dog walks, and we do microchip clinics as a way to do fundraising. Of course, donation boxes and contests. Those are all different things. We're having a Halloween contest. So if you've got a pet and you want to dress them up, take some pictures, you can submit an entry to the contest. That's a fundraiser for EASL. Yeah, so it's definitely events that make up a good proportion of what we do for fundraising.
Great. Stephen and Bonnie, you want to add to that?
So for the Historical Society, I would say that grant writing probably makes up 25 to 30% of our revenue. So it's, especially last year, it was really important for us. The other sources of revenue are obviously dues and donations. And then coupled to that are the events that we've been able to put on over the last year. 2021, we took a big hit in 2020 because of COVID. But in 2021, we've been surprisingly successful with our events, which included garden tour. There's a program going on now called Harrowing History, which has been very successful. And then later this year, we're going to have an art show, an online art show and sale, which I think will be very helpful to us. So, the grant writing for us is, like I said, is really important.
And for certain things, like really very expensive things that we need to focus on. We have a famous artist who lived in Bordentown, Susan Waters, and at our friend's meeting house, we have 2 huge Susan Waters paintings, but they need to be cleaned, and it's going to be really expensive, like thousands of dollars. And she has a birthday coming up in 2023, like, I don't know, 150-year-old birthday, something like that. So we're hoping to do something like, a grant writing for something that's so substantial in terms of the cost to us. But I also just wanted to mention, in case anybody needs something like a roof, like when we needed a roof for the Clara Barton Schoolhouse and we had a blue tarp on that building, people were like emailing us and calling us and saying, what's wrong with the schoolhouse? And we raised a lot of money when that blue tarp was on that building. We kind of feel like we would like to put it back on, even though now we have a new roof. But if anybody is doing any kind of construction, you put a big tarp on your building, it'll, probably bring a lot of attention to it and a lot of, donations. Just a little tip.
Generating interest for those individual donors is helpful. However you can do it.
Exactly.
Yep. Beth, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so this is where I get very excited about talking about fundraising and funding plans. And when I joined Special Stride 6 years ago, they relied very, very, very heavily on 2 major fundraisers. And they were always very concerned about, well, what happens if the weather is bad? Like, people won't come. And when you're relying so heavily on your fundraisers to generate revenue, it's wonderful that they did so well and grew incredibly. So we started slowly trying to broaden things out. So let me first say that grants there are 2 different sides of these grants. There's the piece that is kind of like on our wish list items that might not be in our budgetary expenditures for the year, but they're things that we need that we know that we need. So we have them on that list. So when we find the grantor that wants to fund an object versus a program, then that's what we will go to. But the other thing that we did, and again, as far as our overall operating budget, we do have a pretty significant portion that comes from grants. We also moved away from just having event-based sponsorship to annual sponsorship platform. That's something that we developed and deployed this year. And oh goodness, I'm going to draw, most of it does also come from private donations, private individuals making donations. So that there's kind of a very broad way that we get funding, and that this makes it a little bit easier for us to shift around when something happens, or we lose a grant, or we're not able to find funding, or if we, at the beginning of the pandemic last year, we didn't have any clients. And one would say, okay, well, that's great. Well, we rely on our equines and to be part of our therapy strategies, and they still needed to be fed. They still needed vets. They still needed all of the things the living animal needs, but because we weren't having revenue from clients, we needed to find funding from somewhere else. But because we had all of these different things in place, we were able to adjust. Now, our clients, a lot of their fees are subsidized by a scholarship fund. And our scholarship fund is funded, most of the funding comes in during our big event in the fall, which is just now, I think, 10 days away on October 10th. we're having an event called Back in the Saddle. It's both in person and virtual, and by all means, you can check out our website to see about that. If you are interested in attending in person, by all means, you can buy tickets. If you just want to check us out for the virtual portion, see kind of how we're doing things, by all means, register and see what that's like. But again, the bulk of our funding for more than 50% of our clients does come from the Stephen Worthen Memorial Fund and Fund a Child, and that funding happens during our barn dance. This year is referred to as Back in the Saddle. So that's kind of the overall spectrum of where everything comes from.
Good luck with your event coming up. Natalie, you want to finish that last question for us?
Yeah, I also get excited talking about this, but I think just a few that have come to mind. Giving Tuesday is a big event because it's usually when I think it's end of the year giving, and so usually that's when I think people are more likely to give, and so we usually do a pretty big event surrounding that, and it's actually all online. We've done kind of in-person fundraisers before, but we've been excited about how it has gone in the past, and hopefully will continue in the future. The other thing I will mention is in-kind donations. So every single one of our dinners is every night for our girls are donated. Our accounting up until very recently was also pro bono. Dinners was from Sustainable Fare. Our accounting was from With Them. We've had $35,000 of like filing kind of legal fees, also pro bono through pro bono partnership. So all of these, everything in the budget, it adds up, and we've been very lucky. Even all of our furniture from Homefront, everything has been donated to us. So that is, I believe it's around a fifth of our budget has been from in-kind donations. So that's something that we heavily rely on. I'll say the last is individual donors. That's definitely something that I think we are trying to, I don't think that has been our focus, especially because we're a new organization. And so we've kind of been more into pitch competitions, usually for startups, which have been really fun, but also, if you get lucky, you get a big prize money. And so that's something that we've looked into as well. Not sure who is in the audience today and if that would fit, but I highly recommend doing that if that fits into your eligibility criteria.
Great. Everyone has shared so much information today with those 7 questions that we asked. For anybody in attendance, if you have questions for the panelists, please put those into the Q&A. We do have about 12 minutes left in today's program, so if you have any questions, please share.
If you would like it directed at a specific person, you can write their name too. So we'll be happy to open that up. Get us rolling if anybody wants to tackle this question. But how much support from other nonprofits was part of getting started and all that? How important, I guess, is the nonprofit community to bolster each other and everything that's happening in New Jersey? So if anybody would like to take a stab at that, you're more than welcome to.
I can speak to that. We've definitely heavily relied on other nonprofits. As I mentioned, like places like Homefront have donated furniture to us, or we also don't believe in reinventing the wheel. So, if other places have programming that could be offered to our girls, we usually partner with them, such as somewhere like Woman's Space. And so they have definitely been instrumental to allowing us to do what we're doing. Last, I also want to shout out our parents, because we would not be able to do anything without our parents' support as well.
Hey, Andrew, I'd like to comment on that.
Sure.
Sure. I think the 501c3 community has been really, very open to collaborations. We've worked a little bit with Homefront as well at Easel, and also One Simple Wish. They early on recommended to us that we do a SWOT analysis, and that turned out to be very, very helpful for us to do. And then the other rescues and shelters in New Jersey are very, very collaborative. So we've, when we've had an overcrowding issue, we've been able to transfer animals up to St. Hubert's. And we've also recently been able to take a lot of animals from Trenton Cats Rescue and from some of the other shelters and rescues in the area. So, I think there's a lot of great collaborations going on in the community.
I think you all have, yeah, go ahead, Beth.
So I would also like to recommend people who are, in this nonprofit world, one of the best easy access is the Community Works. Just being able to interface with other people. You learn so much about what's going on in New Jersey and in the world, really. It gives you an opportunity to learn about other opportunities. So that is a really good organization and conference. I went to it in person for years, and then they had a virtual one this past year. So I would recommend that as well.
Beth, that's the Princeton Community Works.
Correct. Yep.
Yes, I've been there several times. It's very reasonably priced too for what you get out of it. It's a wonderful event. And I know personally, I met Natalie, one of our panelists, at the Trenton area stakeholders meeting, which is another kind of networking organization for nonprofits in the Trenton area. If anybody else on this panel has another organization that they've taken part in that they wanted to share to the audience as maybe a possible resource, because I know we're not all in the Mercer area, so.
Yeah, we're unmuted.
You want to unmute?
Go ahead.
Oh,
Hi.
we are unmuted. Hi. I just wanted to say that in addition to having some interaction with other historical societies, one of the things that is on our list to do for our website is to promote some of the events of other local historical societies by having a section that says, events of our friends. We just haven't been able to do that yet. We just hired a relatively new webmaster, but we thought that that would be helpful because there is, for example, there's a Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Museum in Washington, D.C. and a Civil War Medicine Museum. And we've interacted with them a little bit, and they've shared some information, some of our information, and we've shared some of theirs. So, so that's one idea. But the other thing I wanted to say is that we've had a tremendous amount of support from our city. I mean, we have a very little tiny city, the city of Bordentown. There's only over 4,000 people here, but the city has a newsletter, and they've included the Historical Society information in the newsletter. They've given us Old City Hall for our current event. And so I think that, for those folks that have the ability to get support from their local city or township, that's, something also, to explore, because we've been very lucky in that regard.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I've talked with a lot of nonprofits where they have the support of their city, their county, and even at the legislative level for federal grants. That's very important. Your legislature can be a very good resource as well. If they can't help you, they'll try to point you to someone who can.
Well, it looks like that there are no questions. You have done a fantastic job. Yes, somebody asked about the contact information, and that is our official last slide. So here is the email addresses for all of the different organizations if you want to reach out for more information. If you have questions, if you want tips, maybe some collaborative efforts. Lee's contact information is there as well. So if you do want to come and schedule an appointment to use our resources or maybe find out some other information, you can certainly contact Lee and do that. So
If you need assistance using the Foundation Directory online, I know Beth mentioned that several times today, which I appreciate. Shout out. Please feel free to reach out to myself and the other FIN members that I mentioned earlier today. We are here to help you use that resource as a funding information network partner. So look at us as a resource for your organization.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd like to first thank all of our panelists for their time, their knowledge, their information. It really is invaluable. And as it's kind of been highlighted, the New Jersey nonprofit community supports itself in a lot of ways too, which is kudos to everything that you do. So I'd also like to thank our attendees today. I hope you found this informative, enlightening. As I said, we would love to hear your feedback in the survey afterwards. And please, any questions, suggestions, anything, please feel free to reach out to us. So I just like to end by saying everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we can see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.